Today is an all free agency special episode. We'll talk to reporters from Vegas, Pietrangelo, Edmonton, Ottawa, Montreal, and St. Louis to the fallout of getting Krug and not Pietrangelo. Oh, and did I say we're going to talk about Pietrangelo in this episode? Enjoy, everyone. Hit the music. Welcome to Jablam Sports Hockey, folks. I'm your host, Peter Bonjaranoff, and the mic is always on. You can find me on Twitter at Russia98. You can find the full show at Jablam Sports. If you have any questions or comments, please tweet us. Use the hashtag Jablam Sports. That's JABLAM Sports. Please subscribe to us if you haven't done so yet, and click on the three dots in your podcasting app. Share our show with three hockey fans you know. Thank you, everyone. Remember, check out our website, go to jablamsports.com, see all our podcasts, and even game notes for each episode. You'll get links to all the things we mentioned on this show, including guests. For our podcasts, click on podcasts, and then hockey on this show specifically right on our website. All right, in our all free agency episode, we're going to start with the Sens because they went out in free agency and they spent like crazy, right, Colin?
You never really know what to expect from the Sens, although I guess the one constant thing is that they'll always be quiet in free agency. So,
all right. Yeah, so we'll get all to big free agency signings, and later on in the episode, we'll talk about Pietrangelo going to Vegas and everything. Mm-hmm. But right now, we're going to talk Senators. We're going to talk with Colin. Of course, he's the writer and editor at Silver7 Sens, and he's the co-host of the CP Pointcast. You can reach him on Twitter at Cudmore Colin. Colin, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Peter. Always glad to join.
So they beat the punch. They went and beat the punch, signed Matt Murray. We're going to talk more about that, and I will talk about Matt Murray, but I do find it a little interesting because, and we just kind of stated it right before, the Sens are an interesting team because maybe the pandemic hits certain teams a little bit harder than others, and they might not be spending towards the cap. Is that the plan, or do you see something else in mind, really?
Well, the Ottawa Senators have always been capped by their owner, Eugene Melnyk. So I don't find that the pandemic is going to change much in that sense. They've always operated on an internal budget. And I feel like if the past few years have been any indication with the way that they've torn down this team, is that most of it has been in the name of cost saving for Eugene Melnyk and keeping his wallet at the bare minimum. My podcast is called the Cost Per Point Cast, and we say that we're called that for a reason. It's a famous quote from Eugene Melnyk because he always wants to improve the cost per point. And while the team may not be improving the points, he's certainly been cutting costs and improving the cost per point in that area. So they're well below the salary cap floor right now. I expect most of that will be filled in by RFAs, and they've done a couple of trades to fill that in as well. So while I don't think the pandemic has, I don't think the pandemic has uniquely affected the Senators. I mean, it's affected every single team. We did actually see that they cut their coach's salary by quite a bit, and they appealed for that. But besides that, in terms of like actual spending in the payroll on the roster, I feel like it's probably just more Melnyk's cheap wallet than anything else at this point.
They decided not also to re-sign, you would say, their best sniper of all of last season in Anthony Duclair. Is that more cost per point?
I certainly think so. There's a couple of ways that you can look at it. And there's the first way, which is what the team is saying, is that it was purely a hockey move. And personally, I don't buy that. Because I can certainly see the flaws in Duclair's game. He had one goal in the second half of last year after his hot start, and is flat out, he is pretty awful defensively as well. He can be pretty lackadaisical in that aspect and has some pretty awful results. But that still doesn't disregard like all the offensive value that he brings to the Sens and all the sparks that he can bring, especially on offense. So I tend to look at it from more the other angle in the sense that the Sens got a preliminary offer from Duclair on what he might be looking for in arbitration, and they got a little bit spooked by that, and they just they wanted to avoid arbitration altogether and just didn't qualify him, and like, no, we're not even going to deal with this, which to me just seems ridiculous. Arbitration award is going to be a 1 to 2 year deal. And like, what kind of difference is that going to make? And then they go out and sign, and they go out and trade for Austin Watson to fill that spot as an even worse player. So I'm still just as confused as I was when I originally heard the news. I think that it's actually kind of odd to see that the reaction has been this mild on it. I mean, I know Duclair is a flawed player, but he's a guy that is like, it should be a no-brainer for why they shouldn't for qualifying him and giving him a contract offer for the next at least 1 or 2 years. So
yeah,
I don't know why they did it, but it's happened now.
I also find a little interesting in terms of making a move for a goaltender. I know teams think, and other fans, of course, think about, helping out other teams or not so helping out other teams. But in my opinion, this is a place where you can kind of fleece Vegas and get a guy like a Marc-Andre Fleury, recoup in terms of a rebuilding team, maybe more or less like the Senators, and they've got some great first-round picks this year. Getting another first-rounder could have been a thing with getting somebody who is like a Marc-Andre Fleury, and you can eat some of that salary and make Vegas also eat some of that cap as well in acquiring him.
For sure. I totally agree. And there's Fleury is far from the only player who could contend for this. Mm-hmm. I know my co-host at the podcast has mentioned a few players. I know guys like Milan Lucic or there's a handful of players that I'm just forgetting about. But
yeah,
these are players that the Sens could have leveraged their cap space and took on these big contracts and grabbed an additional pick or two at the draft. And it's a bit disappointing that they didn't do that. We saw that that happened with Mark Stahl. Mm-hmm. How they're able to recoup an extra pick for taking on his salary. It was essentially a free pick for taking on Mark Stahl's contract. And I mean, I think this maybe just speaks to how cheap the Sens have been. They have some pretty bad contracts that they've taken on board, but they've always been in exchange for other bad contracts that they're unloading. So I guess I'm not surprised that they haven't weaponized their cap space in this way just because of their cheap owner situation. But yeah, I mean, I want to hold this team to higher standards, and they continually fail to meet them, unfortunately.
So they go and get Matt Murray from the Pittsburgh Penguins, along with the second round pick, and during like basically a couple days before free agency, and they lock him up to $6.25 for 4 years. This seems like more of a contending move, and they're getting a guy with pedigree of Stanley Cups. I guess they've got Murray now, so they do have good goaltending.
Well, I'm personally not as convinced on Murray right now. Last season, he was flat out awful. He was he was like not even one of the top 62 goalies in the league last season from Evolving Hockey's model. But the season before that, he was a top 10 goalie in the NHL. So like, what do we have here? He's a 2-time Stanley Cup champion, and like that. Well, that's still amazing on his resume. I mean, it's still a team award, right? He was part of that much larger team who went all the way to the back-to-back cups, but. Anyways, like he's probably somewhere in the middle there. He's not a subpar backup. He's not a top 10 goal. He's probably somewhere in the middle, but you also can't rule out the possibility that he does one of those things again. So for me, it's just a matter of looking at the options that were available for the Sens. It's hard to predict which goalies are going to be good every year. And taking a swing on Murray for the next 4 years is just kind of a bit of a risky move, I think. If the Sens really at this point, you're right. It seems like it was more of a contender move, and they just need a stopgap option right now to help actually have someone there, because Anders Nielsen is not healthy yet, so they need someone to fill in that gap. So why they didn't go out and spend a 4th or 5th round pick on some other mid-tier goalie who can fill in the spots, or even just go into free agency pool. There are a few free agents who I think would have filled this just as nicely as Murray. To be in that same range as somewhere between a bottom tier backup and somewhere between a top 10 goalie. There's a whole bunch of players that are available who fit that criteria. So why they went for Murray, spent the second round pick and a prospect on it when they should have been making as many picks as possible in this draft is still a bit baffling to me. I'm glad that the price of the trade was lower than was rumored. It was originally rumored to be their 28th overall pick or their 33rd overall pick, and ended up being later in the second round. But still, I just look at the opportunity cost that they missed up and all the other players that I think they should have gone for first. But I can't say I'm too frustrated about it. It's not like a deal breaker or anything. But this has a potential to look very good or very bad. But as of the information now, it's kind of a question mark, I guess.
Yeah, we'll wait and see how he plays when the season does come back. What are they going to be doing with those RFAs now? They haven't locked really many of them up yet. You have Connor Brown, my boy there, and Tierney and Paul and the rest of them. What are they going to do?
I think that, it'll depend on each RFA. I think that there's a few who are scheduled to go to arbitration, and the Sens have gone to arbitration more than any other team in the past handful of years. So I expect there will probably be one or two cases going to arbitration, and the Sens to try and milk out every bit of money that they can, get as good a deal as possible. But ultimately, I think that there's all these players will end up re-signed on the roster as RFAs typically do. I don't really see any more trades in this team's future for this offseason. They've already surprised us a couple of times, acquiring Goodbranson, acquiring Watson, two trades that I'm particularly not very fond of. But RFAs, they're probably going to lock him up for, I don't know. It depends on the RFA. Someone like Connor Brown, I could see they lock up for maybe 3-4 years because he was really favored by DJ Smith and played more than any other Sens he actually played more than any other Sens player period last year.
I know you're not that thrilled about that, but go ahead.
Yeah, I personally see all the players you mentioned. I personally see them as no more than complimentary third line players who are probably going to be playing higher up in the lineup next year. Yeah. So, again, not much of a deal breaker if they end up trading one or two of them. I think Chris Tierney actually might be a decent trade option if they look for that route with all the young centers they have coming up. But I don't know. It's hard to predict the Sens these days.
Yeah, with open spots, we'll just jump right to it. Where do you think Stützle could be playing in this roster?
So first of all, I think it's mentioning that I think Stützle jumps in right away.
Yeah.
There's never been a guarantee since when he was drafted. It would have depended where he was drafted to, and I think the Sens are a perfect team where he'll be able to step in right away. I think that there will be a transitional period for Stützle. The draft is what I've been following most in the past year, and watching so much of Stützle and following this game. I think that there are definitely some things that will need to be ironed out in terms of the way he utilizes space and gets himself into these tight spaces pretty frequently. We know his hands are incredible, and he can get himself out of these tight spaces, but how well is he going to be able to do that at the NHL level? I'm a bit skeptical still, and I think that ultimately he'll be able to come out ahead, but there might be a transitional period there. So ultimately, I think he'll start probably maybe in the third line, middle six role, that they'll start to try and progress him up depending how things go, play things by ear, see how well he adjusts, because again, this is like, he's coming from the DEL to the NHL, which is something that's very unprecedented. It's very unheard of. Very few players have done it in the past decade or past 2 decades even. And especially for a player that young, he's so unique that way. And I'm personally excited to see what he does. I just hope that they kind of ease him in. They don't try to give him 20 minutes a night right away.
Again, you can reach him on Twitter @CudmoreColin. Colin, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks so much, Peter. Anytime.
We have up next Reid Wilkins talk Oilers free agency. He's the host of Inside Sports and Oilers Hockey on 630 CHED. You can find him on Twitter @ReidWilkins. Reid, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, so what if I changed my Twitter bio to something really bizarre? Would you just read that then when you introduce me? What if I was just is half human, half wild boar? Would you just say that and leave out the radio stuff?
Well,
or would you still include the radio stuff?
Well, I always ask my guests how they kind of want the intro. Usually they do like it when I throw in what they're doing and what they're all about. Also with the Twitter handle, I usually ask them. I've had, let's just say, some awkward type guests with some awkward type Twitter handles, and it's been kind of awkward, but we move on.
I got, in the hockey world, you know people. So I have a friend who works in the Western Hockey League who sometimes has to, you got to get the contact info for the parents, right? So obviously now a lot of kids who are playing major junior hockey would have parents who were in their teens and early 20s in the 90s.
Yeah.
And in the 90s is when a lot of people got an email address for the first time. So, so maybe a 13-year-old. So, if you started an email address when you were a 13 or 14-year-old boy or girl, so, he sees emails, the emergency contact, little cutie muffin 14 at hotmail.com, stud Steve Austin, so it is kind of funny, but no, I'm pretty unoriginal with my Twitter handle. My name was good enough for me.
Yeah, again, I know some people that are listening to the podcast know mine, and we kind of talked about it before. You were asking me where I'm from, and I grew up mostly in Brampton, and most of my good friends from high school are Punjabi, and they didn't call me Peter growing up. They called me Russian, and even when I was playing some hockey, they called me Russian because, like a lot of kids, even when I was a really young kid, they called me Bon Jovi. They didn't know how to pronounce Bajaranov or Bryaranov, as we pronounce it a little bit more Russian. So then my Punjabi boys used to call me Russian whenever we played hockey and sports and stuff like that. So that's how I got it. And my favorite number was just one number notch lower of the great one. So that's what I wanted.
Nice.
Yes. All right. So we're going to talk Oilers hockey, and we're going to talk, all the free agency stuff with Turris and Barrie and Mike Smith. But before we get to those deals, Reid, are you hearing any rumors about them maybe locking up RNH?
Well, they're talking. I mean, Ken Holland has confirmed a couple of times that there have been conversations with the agent, and I think that if you look at the situation and you look at Nugent Hopkins, who he is as a player, who he is as a person, and some other things that have happened in his life, I think the preference for both sides is that he remains an Edmonton Oiler. I mean, clearly, you've seen going back to the second half of last year, because, Peter, there were some, maybe Nugent Hopkins is never going to produce points. Maybe he can't carry a line or whatever. I think you saw, he was trying to do it himself or with fifth liners, a lot, especially the second half of the year when Hitch took over. I mean, he was getting guys, called up from the AHL or fourth liners as his line mates. So you saw how good he can be when he's with Draisaitl and Yamamoto, or even when he's been up with McDavid, how valuable he is. Yeah. And he's become a pretty good two-way player. I mean, he really did focus on that part of his game, and I think he's a very good two-way player. So I think it's good that they're talking. I mean, it would be easy for Nuge and the agent to even say already, like, we'll put it off, or I'm already looking ahead to free agency. He's from BC, so he's only one province from that part of his life and that part of his family. And then he has the Red Deer connection with having played junior there, and his wife is from Red Deer. So I think for him, it makes sense if he wants to stay. I think for the Oilers, it clearly makes sense if he wants to stay. So what's the number and the term going to be, right? There's going to be the flat cap. Now, the Oilers will likely have at least a couple of players coming off the books next season. If you want to speculate about Adam Larson or Chris Russell or even Chason or somebody who gets claimed by Seattle. So there's going to be some space. The thing is, and I know you're going to ask me about Tyson Barrie. If he goes out and gets, 0.75 points per game over however many games they wind up playing, then he's going to want a chunk of that. But I'm optimistic about Nuge staying an Oiler. I mean, I think he obviously recognizes the strengths of the team. He'll likely have a chance to play with one of McDavid or Draisaitl for the next several years, and he's on an incredible power play. So, I'm pretty much just hearing what Holland has made it public that they're talking, and if they don't get an extension done, maybe it'll drag into the start of next season. But now, again, we don't know when that's going to be. I think, Peter, the fear would be if you get to the trade deadline and he's not locked up, and what if the Oilers aren't in a let's go for it type of situation, right? If they're maybe, I hope they have a good year, but if they're having an awful year or they're hovering around the cut line and they're thinking like, oh man, like we haven't signed Nuge, what's he going to do in the off season? Then maybe you might worry about him maybe being moved to get something out of that. But I'm pretty optimistic there's a deal there to be had, because I think both sides just recognize what works about it.
Well, I kind of thought that kind of move, maybe at the deadline, if they're not doing too well, that would be more of a thought with Tyson Barrie. So they sign him to just a 1 year for roughly 3.7. It's interesting because I don't know if the Oilers have that kind of defense where they want a more defensive type player, because as I know, and as Leaf Nation knows, and even some Avs fans know, he's a bit more of a high risk type player where he is great and creates very high quality offensive chances with his position there too, but the latter defensively at times. And I'm thinking, as Tyson Barrie, I automatically get to play again on the power play with Dre and Connor. Is this the right fit for the Oilers?
I think it is, and I think because they might not have Oscar Klefbom. I mean, Holland's operating under the premise that he's going to miss at least some of the season, maybe all of it. And right now, let's speculate that the season's maybe going to go January till the end of April, and then the playoffs are in May and June, maybe a bit into July.
Yep.
So I think they wanted somebody who could handle the power play minutes, because when we've seen, Darnell Nurse, for example, has to play a little more on the power play. It hurts his overall game. I get it and I'm sure there's going to be nights where Barrie's going to be maybe a little frustrating defensively or 5-on-5. I think, and I've seen a lot of back and forth on Twitter about it, that to me, he was clearly a better player after the coaching change in Toronto. So I think that bodes well for the Oilers. I wouldn't write him off after kind of an off year when he still had, a decent point total, but I know it didn't go the way they wanted in Toronto. He seems really energized. I mean, he mentioned to Bob Stauffer today that even weeks ago he was thinking about Edmonton and clearly he could have gotten, sounds like, at least $5 million elsewhere, maybe even closer to $6 million. So he wanted to be in Edmonton, and I think it's one of those betting on himself type deals. So I get it. There's probably going to be times the puck winds up in the Oilers' net, and maybe he didn't do as much as you would have liked defensively. But I mean, he should be their best offensive defenseman since Chris Pronger. Pronger could kind of do a bit of everything and was better overall than Barrie, obviously, but Pronger could also get points. So I think it's a good signing for the Oilers. And again, it's only a year. So if it's a disaster, they can walk away, or like you said, if it's that much of a disaster, they could move him at the deadline. But I think it's a good deal. And look, you know what, Peter? I'm old enough for people to remember people complaining about Paul Coffey's defense. But he got over 100 points. I know it was a higher scoring league, but I mean, he was top 5 in scoring several years. He was in. I'm not saying Barrie's going to produce points that way, but I do think there's always going to be a little bit of a trade off. And I honestly think, Peter, if I can say maybe something a little outrageous, he should make the power play even better than it was with Klefbom, because he's a better scorer than Klefbom.
Yeah. Well, I'm on that side. I remember when I was a young little kid, and I actually liked Larry Murphy as a Maple Leaf. I know some people didn't like because he was a little slow in terms of speed, but he had his head on a swivel, and he knew exactly who to feed the puck and where the puck to go and get that puck on the net. So I know they had to let him go, and they didn't get much for him. And the Red Wings utilized Murphy really well, but that's a different story. So now that they've brought in Barrie, and they might need, it hasn't been great between the pipes, and especially for a guy like Mike Smith, especially over the last 2 seasons, could they have improved goaltending more, or was Mike Smith just the right way to go?
Well, I think Holland looked around, and I mean, he didn't make a secret of the fact he looked around. Mike Smith said it in his interview Saturday. Ken did his job. I knew he had to look around. I think just as other pieces were moved around, I think Holland realized, okay, I'm not going to get anybody else, or there probably weren't any trades out there that he liked for some of the guys that might be available. It sounded like they hung in there with Markstrom. Obviously didn't want to pay that ticket. Holtby, everything I'm hearing from people I still talk to in Lloydminster was that Holtby didn't want to play in Edmonton, that he actually didn't want to be that close to home and have the distractions. So I think once you kind of got further down the list, Holland just decided to go with Smith. It's a question mark. Now, last year during the regular season, I give the goaltending a passing grade. Both guys had dips, but both guys had really good runs during last regular season. I mean, Smith, as bad as Smith was in November and December, he was awesome in January and February, right? When the Oilers, so you got to give the credit with the criticism, I think. Koskinen, I've said this over and over again, Peter. I like Koskinen better as a highly used backup. I think he's a good goaltender to play around 40% of the games. Now, this year, it's probably going to have to be the other way. Maybe, let's assume it's a 60-game season. Maybe it's 40 for Koskinen and 20 for Smith. I do think they're going to have to lean on Koskinen more than Smith this year, just because of the age difference. And again, Smith's, like Koskinen was a steadier goalie. Smith's highs were higher, but his lows were way lower, which is why I think ultimately they'll wind up going with Smith. I think it's good enough goaltending to get them into the playoffs again. Playoffs are going to be a different story, and that's probably where the tale will ultimately be told.
Yeah. They also added Kyle Turris. So I'm at 1.6 only for 2 years. I'm guessing a third line option, and that will really help with their depth and maybe even offense in the bottom six.
I like the Turris signing. Again, relatively low risk. Sure 2 years, but if it's that much of a disaster, there'd be ways to get out of it after the first year. Here's the thing about the Oilers. They used to sign players like Kyle Turris and say, okay, you got to be the first or second line center because we have nobody else. Now they're a little deeper, so they can sign Kyle Turris, who Nashville was hoping was going to be a second line center, and say, look, man, you're the third line center. Provide offensive support, check, get the puck out, do those things, which I realize, maybe isn't a strength of Turris's game, but hopefully he'll commit to that. So, and he's a right shot. So again, I that's what I like about most of Ken Holland's signings, not all of them, but most of them over the last couple of years, relatively low risk, right? Like Granlund didn't work out. Well, you're not carrying him around for 4 years, right? You can kind of walk away with it. Took a chance on Yurko last year. That's fine. Shane came in for a year, plugged a hole. Archibald has worked out well. So to me, Turris is kind of in that same ilk. And, look, if he can get, again, working off, I'll try to use points per game instead of going off 80 games. If Turris gets around half a point per game, that's more than the Oilers have got for a third line center in a long time. And sure, his point total is going to matter, but I also look and say, okay, who last year kind of was trying to play third or fourth line center? Well, Riley Sheahan, not a 5-on-5 point producer. Jujhar Khaira, who went back and forth with the wing, not a great 5-on-5 point producer. Gaetan Haas, probably more of a fourth line guy than a third line guy. Sam Gagner, who wound up getting traded, he played the wing as well. So I think that's where you look at Turris and you say, okay, is he the best third line center in the league? No, but is he better than what the Oilers have had in recent years? Yes. So I think that's where it's a valuable upgrade.
Yeah, I think it's a good fit for them for sure. And before we leave, surprisingly enough, I think for me at least, they brought back Jesse Puljujarvi. You can tell he wants to be here, right? So
I think he realized he wasn't going to be anywhere else. Yeah. To me, and I hope he does well. I think it's on him. Do I think the organization mishandled him at times? Absolutely. Absolutely. But having said that, look at any workplace. Anybody can look around and say, well, maybe the boss isn't great to this guy, but at some point he has to step up and do a better job. So I hope Puljujarvi embraces it. I also think given the value of this contract, again, a bit of a no-lose for the Oilers. Look, you weren't going to – what did the Rangers trade Anderson for? Like, that's a top 10 pick. Was it the 60th overall pick or something they got? So I'd sooner take a chance, bring the guy back, and see if he can be productive. I think he'll get to play in the top 9 and opportunities in the top 6 if he gets in there and checks and creates plays. For me, about Puljujarvi, it's all about what he does on nights he's not feeling it. Because it's not often that most NHL players don't go into a game feeling 100%, right? After you're about a week into the season. So you have to figure out a way to contribute. I think that's the key for him. And, if it's a 1-1 tight checking game, can he still contribute, and do other things besides generate points? But, it's I think he and Turris, no lose. If they're really good, it could make the Oilers a lot better.
Again, you can reach him on Twitter at Reid Wilkins. Reid, thank you for joining us.
Anytime, Peter.
Now we'll talk to the winners, the big winners of free agency. Justin Emerson's here to talk Golden Knights. Of course, he's Vegas Golden Knights reporter for the Vegas Sun and Vegas Weekly. You can find him on Twitter at J15Emerson. Justin, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, Peter. Happy to be here.
For sure. Of course you are. Of course you're happy. So Vegas signs the biggest fish. Everyone wants to know the big question. Why the number 7 for Pietrangelo?
Well, 27 was taken. I mean, that's Shea Theodore's number, and I guess he called him this morning, Tuesday morning. I don't know when this is going to post, but just to kind of chat with Theodore, and in that he said, "Yeah, I've got no interest in taking your number. I'll take 7. We're good."
So he's not going all in with the chips on 7, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, 7 worn by Valentin Zykov and Jason Garrison in Las Vegas. So, lots to live up to.
So we all had to wait a couple of days after free agency, right? It was like we're all waiting, and then everybody wants to see Pietrangelo signing somewhere. And then we're all like, yeah, when is he going to sign with Vegas? We all know he's going to sign with Vegas now. All signs are pointing there. So kind of why did it take so long? Is it just the salary moving of Nate Schmidt's contract or maybe something else?
I think it was a couple of things. I think the biggest thing was that there wasn't the free agency courting period that's existed in the past. You know, in the past, you had a couple of days leading up to free agency where soon-to-be free agents were allowed to go and visit and talk with other prospective teams, and that just didn't happen this year. So Pietrangelo wasn't allowed to start talking to the Golden Knights and other teams until Friday at noon Eastern time. So by the time that happened, you saw it. There weren't a ton of signings right away. It was a couple of re-signings, but teams had to go talk to other players. And Pietrangelo was, the guy that was about to sign a 7-year, almost $9 million per year contract. So he was in no rush. He knew that he held the cards pretty good. But the other thing was the contracts. I mean, Vegas was already over the salary cap heading into free agency after the Robin Lehner and Chandler Stevenson extensions. They moved Paul Stastny on Friday right before free agency began. But even then, there still wasn't enough room for them to sign Pietrangelo. So I think part of it was finding a buyer for Nate Schmidt's contract, and they moved him to Vancouver at about the same time that they signed Pietrangelo. So, it was a variety of things. But, I mean, if it took 3 extra days for the Golden Knights to ink Pietrangelo, I don't think that they're too worried about it.
How will Alex improve this Vegas club? Because last time I checked, they're pretty much the best team in the West. I know they can somehow, I don't know how they can beat the Stars. I guess things were clicking for them and they got to the finals. But many of us, we already had them pegged to go all the way. How much more does Pietrangelo move the needle?
I think he does quite a bit. I think because he's going to jump in. Basically, he's going to be Nate Schmidt's replacement. Mm-hmm. Schmidt was the top pairing on the right side. He was with Braden McNabb. They drew the biggest defensive assignments for the Golden Knights over the past couple of years. Schmidt played in all situations, power play, even strength, penalty kill. Pietrangelo is going to do that just a little bit better. And, Pietrangelo is a guy that eats up minutes. He's over the last 10 years, he's averaged almost 25 minutes per night. That's just something that the Golden Knights had never had, was that true bona fide number one superstar defenseman. And Shea Theodore, I think, is getting there. I mean, he did finish 6th in the Norris. He had a great offensive season and really broke out in the playoffs. But Pietrangelo does it in all situations, in all parts of the ice. And while Theodore is a tremendous offensive talent, his defensive game is coming along. And what Pietrangelo is able to do is eat up those, when you're facing, let's just say the Oilers, because they're in the same division, you get Pietrangelo that gets to fight off the McDavid line and let Theodore go take on the lower line so he can focus more on offense and not have to worry about as much on defense. So it's just something that Pietrangelo is going to have such a trickle-down effect on the entire team. And I think that all these salary moves that they did have to make, Stastny and Schmidt, I think are going to be worth it to get a bona fide superstar in Pietrangelo on their blue line.
For sure. So if you go way back to the beginning of this franchise, their inaugural one, they went to the final. They seem to be adding more and more firepower and top skill players every year. Stastny, Pietrangelo, and now they had Pacioretty, Stone. Are they getting Sidney Crosby next?
Yeah, they haven't been shy about getting the big names. I mean, they got Marc-Andre Fleury in the expansion draft. They got James Neal. I mean, those were big names, and then they made it to the Stanley Cup final with a lot of people that nobody had ever really heard of. But they did have a couple of names, and then that offseason they went and got Paul Stastny and Max Pacioretty, and then that trade deadline they got Mark Stone, and then the next trade deadline it was Robin Lehner, and then the offseason it's Alex Pietrangelo. And it does seem like that they add a big name star every chance they get. Yeah, and that's that's how you build a fan base, I suppose. I mean, they've been around for 3 years and they've been as aggressive as any team in the league. It's paid off. They've been to 2 Western Conference Finals already in 3 seasons. They haven't missed the playoffs. They're, you can almost pencil them into the Western Conference Final again this season. Like it really is pretty insane. And I got to say, just covering this team, you're never bored. You are never bored when you're covering this team. It seems like that they have a big name acquisition every 6 months.
For sure. I think most of the NHL world is intrigued and also shocked with how Vegas attacks the NHL this way. They keep on building, adding, and just cutting underneath. It's interesting.
They treat roster construction the way I do when I'm playing franchise mode on NHL 20. Like, they're just going to go out and get whatever they need to get to make their team better. They don't seem to worry too much about the human aspect of it. I mean, Nate Schmidt, that had to have been hard on a personal level for them to trade, but on a hockey level, like, it just makes sense for them to move him to get Pietrangelo. And they just don't seem to care. They're going to go out and do whatever they can to make the team better. And that's definitely admirable.
You know what I love to do? I love playing franchise mode, and I make sure my team is at the bottom part of the cap. So then every free agency, I get the best 2 players available, sign them to 1 year, and then trade them at the deadline and recoup more top picks. And I just keep on recycling that and making sure I keep my core, who in my game I've signed to good contracts except for Leafs GMs. And I got Matthews and Marner and Nylander for like $6 million, so they're great.
There you go.
All right. So another thing is, what's the prognosis with Lehner and his surgery? And is that the main reason why, another reason why they took a little bit time with the Pietrangelo signing and why they decided to keep Flower?
I don't know how much it had to do with the Pietrangelo signing, but I think it is at least part of the reason why they decided not to trade Fleury. Colin Cudmore, the general manager, said Monday night that Robin Lehner's going to have surgery this offseason on his shoulder, what he called a cleanup surgery. They don't expect a whole lot of complications, but you never do. And that they expect Lehner to be ready to go whenever next season begins.
Mm-hmm.
I think the biggest reason why Fleury is going to stay at Golden Knight is that they couldn't find a taker for him. I mean, This is a guy who has $7 million on his cap for the next 2 seasons in maybe the craziest goalie market we've seen in a long, long time. It seems like that there was, half a dozen to 10, whatever number it was, starting goaltenders on the market, both in free agency and to trade. And, teams can be choosy, and they couldn't get Fleury off the cap. And now, he was coming off one of the worst seasons he's had in a long time, lost his starter's job in the playoffs. But I think it seems like it's going to work out for the Golden Knights. They're going to pay more of their cap to goaltending than any other team except for Montreal.
Yeah.
And, I think they've definitely talked themselves into it between having Lehner and Fleury for a full season that might be condensed. You might have to play a lot of back-to-backs, 3 games in 4 nights kind of thing this upcoming season, however the schedule falls. So, Lehner and Fleury are going to be Golden Knights next season. So that's not a bad tandem to have.
Do you think they had, an opportunity to maybe, or even a thought process to keeping some of Fleury's cap in the move and losing a mid-round pick as well, or no, not at all?
I mean, I think that was the asking price. It seemed like teams were looking for even a first-round pick to take on half of Fleury's contract. And that's the most, obviously, that Vegas can retain is half. So that's what they were trying to do. And clearly they couldn't find a taker, or the price was too high to, you never want to have to give up a first-round pick to make a player go away. I mean, you're a Leafs guy. You saw how that worked out last year with Patrick Marleau, and that's or 2 years ago or whenever it was. But I mean, I think that the price just became too high for Vegas, and they decided to address that move elsewhere. And I think Nate Schmidt was a casualty of that.
Yeah. The Knights are now slightly over the cap, and I like how he came out and said, "We'll be cap compliant by the time next season starts." Well, I hope they are.
those are the rules. Yeah, I asked Kelly McCrimmon on Monday, are you cap compliant right now? Because we can kind of see Cap Friendly and all these sites, but teams have their internal numbers and all that. So I asked him, and he said we will be cap compliant by opening night. It's like, okay, well, so there could still be another move or two. They could also hold players down in the AHL for a couple of days to accrue that cap space. They could the guy's hurt, you could go on LTIR. There are definitely ways to get around trying to shave $1 million or so off your cap. So I wouldn't worry too much about the Golden Knights. I don't think another big move is coming if I had to take a guess.
All right. You can find him on Twitter at J15 Emerson. Justin, thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Anytime. Thanks.
Next up on the show, we have Laura Astorian. She's the site manager at St. Louis Game Time. And of course, the website is stlouisgametime.com. You can find her on Twitter at HildyMac. Laura, welcome back to the show.
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. It was an interesting blur of the season ended. Then there's the draft. Then there's the long whole day of 2 to 7 rounds of the draft. And then 2 days later, it's free agency. And then it's like, what is happening with Pietrangelo? And that's what we're going to discuss, right?
Yeah.
So, first off, I guess I'm going to pull on some emotional heartstrings with fans and followers and media alike of the Blues. What was your immediate reaction? Because we talked about it before with Pietrangelo and maybe not coming and going. But what was the immediate reaction when the Blues signed Torrey Krug?
I think that it was. I think everybody just pretty much took it as, the writing being on the wall. Mm-hmm. Like that was the sign to us, and apparently a surprise to Pietrangelo, which it shouldn't have been, but it was. That the talks weren't going anywhere, and Doug Armstrong isn't going to sit around and wait, and he has the responsibility to make the team better and competitive, and Torrey Krug's the best free agent defenseman after Pietrangelo, so I personally, I think it was a good signing, but yeah, no, it really. I think once that news broke, everybody just kind of knew, even though Doug Armstrong kind of played a little coy in the Zoom call that he had later on that day where he mentioned, the door wasn't closed yet, and yada, yada, yada. Mm-hmm. But, he's good at cap management. He's not, a miracle worker. So, we just kind of figured that was the sign that, the captain had moved on.
I know my Blues followers, even shout out to my boy Woo. Many of them were pretty pissed. I had a few of them talking to me for hours that night after the Krug signing. They're like, what? Why? What about Pietrangelo? So I feel their pain, and I'm sorry for you guys. So because they locked up Krug to the 6.5, where does he fit in? Is he automatically the new Alex Pietrangelo in terms of the role? He's maybe a little bit more offensive, but he's not as well-rounded, right?
No, I don't know. It is a down. As much as you can say signing Torrey Krug's a downgrade, it is a downgrade. And I think that Pietrangelo really is one of those rare defensemen where he is the total package. Yeah. And Krug's a little smaller, but he's also younger, which is good. Because I know that Doug Armstrong's always been kind of hesitant. Not always, because we still have Alex, we still have Steen, but he is a little hesitant with signing players long term through end of career years a lot of times.
Yeah.
So I think that this contract, as far as age wise goes, it definitely works out better in the Blues' favor. But I do think they're probably going to try just slotting him in where Pietrangelo usually went. Mm-hmm. But I don't think it's fair for people to expect the same kind of output. Krug's going to be great on the power play. And the signing as a whole it's not like it concerns me or anything. Yeah. But he's not the same kind of player, and hopefully fans realize that. And I think that they will, to a point. I think a lot of Blues fans are too busy focusing on what a bad year Justin Falk had. Then if that carries over to next year, nobody else on defense is going to have a bit of attention paid to him because everybody will still be complaining about Falk and that contract. So,
yeah. So they don't have any room with the cap. Where are they going with Vince Dunn here? He's a player who's ready for a raise. He's an RFA, and he still has really good upside.
Yeah, and I don't think it's particularly fair to judge Dunn on the postseason bubble play either. Yeah. I mean, if what Doug Armstrong said was right, and like 20% of the team had COVID. I mean, if Dunn was one of those, it explains why he didn't look right. Yeah. I mean, it really does. So, I mean, hopefully fans will, and Armstrong will take that into consideration. I think he's going to get a bit of a raise. Like, I don't think it's going to be anything earth shattering, but since the season starts with, with Tarasenko and Steen both on long-term injury reserve, Army doesn't really have to really do too awful much to be cap compliant right off the bat. And he didn't sound like he was really concerned, which I guess kind of makes me wonder to a degree about, what's going on with Steen. And if whatever that injury was, and I'm not even 100% sure what the injury was, but whatever the injury was, if it's, if it may be a little bit more of a long-term absence for Steen than people, were hoping for. So I think he'll find a way to get Dunn in. I don't think that, Dunn's going to get a giant raise, but I do think he's due for one. And I think that one would be justified. Yeah.
So with that, and the Blues are already a tad over $1 million over the cap. Thank you, cap friendly. What's their next move here? So they might have a few guys like Tarasenko and Steen out a bit long term, but with Vince Dunn maybe getting locked up here, they can pull that in. Are they going to have to make another move? Are they going to move on from a team player like Tyler Bozak?
I don't know. There's been lots of speculation, especially before the Pietrangelo stuff went down, that, Bozak would be the top candidate for getting moved somewhere. Just because out of all, his contract's not huge, but out of the players that we have, I think age-wise and contract size-wise, his would probably and skill set, because he's still a very good quality player that a lot of teams would probably like to have. I think that the odds of us moving him out of everybody on the team are probably the best. But as far as moving a guy with, that kind of veteran leadership with Steen being out, I mean, I don't know how much Armstrong really necessarily wants to do that, but with him this time of year, like, nothing's off the table. I mean, I know he said that the Blues are pretty much done for right now, unless, something happens, but I mean, if the possibility presents itself, then I don't see him not doing it.
Well, I'm sorry, Blues fans, but this is what happens when you win the cup. Enjoy the memories and the images, and hold on to your paraphernalia of that amazing run. This is just what happens when players get a little tad more expensive, and you have to let go of some great players in a salary cap world.
Yeah, especially when the cap isn't moving for a while. So I think a lot of teams are going to find themselves trying to, having to be very creative with how they handle stuff.
For sure. Again, you can find her on Twitter @HildyMac. Laura, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Let's furnish some free agency talk today with the Canadiens. Now we talk to Jared Book. He's the deputy managing editor at Habs EOTP. That's Habs on the Prize. Of course, you can find him on Twitter @Jared Book. Jared, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So before we get to Tyler's signing with the Habs, I like the tweet today, or from what Pierre Maguire mentioned, and he's talking about it now, that it seems like the Habs are in better shape than the Bruins and the Leafs. Is he correct in any sense of the matter?
I think there's an argument to say that the Canadiens improved more than the Bruins and the Maple Leafs. The Maple Leafs did some things, but they also lost some guys, and I don't know if they necessarily got as improved as much as the Canadiens did. The Bruins, obviously, losing Torrey Krug is a big loss for them. They got Craig Smith, and they still have some cap room to play with. but I don't think that the Canadiens are necessarily a better team than the Maple Leafs and the Bruins. I think that they can fight with them. I think, at the end of the season, whenever it does get in their way, I think that there's a chance that they do pass one of those teams. But I don't think you can say that they're better than them on paper. But I do think there is a definite argument that they improved more than the Bruins and the Maple Leafs. And I don't think that that's necessarily what McGuire meant, but I think that's what he's looking at when he does say that.
I beg to differ a little bit. I would say that maybe the Leafs added in the areas that they needed to add it, especially the way they play come playoff time. So I think they might have lost some players like a Tyson Barrie, but that even when they added him, I think he wasn't the right fit with Toronto. So
yeah, and I think that what they did do is good as well. And obviously, the guys leaving are they traded Andreas Johnsson as well. But yeah, I think when you look at the two teams, I think that they're a lot closer than maybe people think. When you think about the Leafs, you think about their Matthews and Marner and Tavares and Nylander and Riley as well. And I think that there's this perception that the Canadiens are well behind them. But if you look at the standings, even 2 years ago, they were maybe 3 points out of the Leafs. And then they obviously missed the playoffs by just about a couple of points as well. Yeah. And then last year, if you're looking at the playoff teams, obviously it's not necessarily the best picture to paint, but Montreal made the playoffs and Toronto didn't, right? So I think that there's this perception and that Toronto is well ahead of Montreal in their respective rebuilds. And again, I'm not saying that Montreal is necessarily better than Toronto, especially not on paper, but I think that they're a lot closer than they appear to be. Obviously the top of the Leafs lineup is better than anything Montreal can put out there, except maybe in goal. Yeah. But I do think that there's an argument to be made for Montreal's depth, and it maybe gets underrated a little bit. But yeah, you wouldn't see me arguing that Montreal is better than Boston and Toronto, at least at this point right now.
Speaking about that solid goaltending, they have Carey Price there, and as we saw in the playoffs, he can still easily be vintage Price. But they make the interesting move to bring in Jake Allen. So now they have a $15 million cap hit with both Carey and Jake between the pipes. I don't know. It's an interesting move there, Cotton. Let's see how it plays out.
You know what, though? There's a lot of things that Marc Bergevin could have taken from this playoffs, right? It was a weird setup. Obviously, this team was not anywhere close to the playoffs when the season ended. They ended up making the playoffs. There's a lot of things you can take from that really small sample in the bubble. And honestly, I think that he took all the right things from that. You look at how they played in the playoffs. You saw a rested Carey Price, and he was unbelievable. If it wasn't for his own team scoring, I think 5 or 6 goals deflected off of Canadiens players in that series against Philadelphia, his numbers would be even better, and they probably win the series. A couple of bad bounces away, and that series goes the other way, despite Montreal not really scoring. And I think that was one of the things that he can take away from that, is that Carey Price playing too much makes Carey Price worse, and by extension makes your team worse. And I think having a reliable backup goaltender or a tandem goaltender, no matter which way you want to put it, is really important. And I think that is this is the first time he's had a reliable backup. He's had Keith Kincaid, which didn't work out, Peter Budaj, guys that just didn't work out as his backup. And I think now there's a reliable, Jake Allen could probably have gotten more money than a lot of the free agent goaltenders on Friday, right? So I do think that there's this isn't a long-term solution. They're not going to re-sign Jake Allen. They're not going to go into next season with $15 million between their two goalies. But as a short-term solution, they have the cap space to play with. They have a year until Caden Primo is probably going to be the backup goaltender to Carey Price and have a tandem in that sense. I think that this was the time to go for it. And I think that was maybe one of the best moves that Marc Bergevin made in this offseason. And I liked a lot of the moves he made, and I'm sure we're going to talk about a few more. But this isn't a long-term solution. This isn't, and that was the big thing about getting Jake Allen, is that, people were, at the time when he made the trade, were like, look at all the free agent goaltenders there are going to be. But the key here is the 1-year contract. Yeah. And going into the future, a guy like Corey Crawford, which is he's a local guy from the Montreal area, and that was a guy that a lot of people were saying, oh, you could just get him instead of paying Jake Allen. But even if you do save a little bit, and Corey Crawford, I think is making 3.8 with the Devils, he signed for 2 years. So the key here was the 1-year contract, and I think that of the goaltenders he could have approached, that was the best move. And I think that he took that away from seeing how Carey Price was when he was rested, and Carey Price playing 50 games is the best thing for the Montreal Canadiens. Even if you're paying him $10 million, you're paying him $10 million to play as well as he can, and that's limiting his games and giving yourself a chance to win when he's not in there. And that's something that they haven't had in the last few years.
Yeah, I actually, other than the cap maybe hit, I actually like the move. It's good, to give Price a little bit more time off. And I feel, too, with them playing the short game here with the 1 year, I'm expecting next season to be a little bit more compact. So you might need a better, well-rested top goalie, right?
Yeah, you're going to have more back-to-backs. And, Carey Price, I think the last 2 seasons down the stretch, when the playoff run down the stretch, he played pretty much every game. And he wasn't himself. And the thing about Carey Price is that he makes a lot of things look nonchalant, and that's always been his calling card. But when he's really focused, you see him being more active, right? You see him attacking shooters and things like that. And that's stuff you didn't see in the regular season. You don't see it when he's playing every night. And I think that that's a key factor. And just watching it, not even from being inside the team, just watching it, you can visibly see a difference. And Jake Allen is going to be, he might be the most important acquisition the Canadiens made this year for the 2020-2021 season, because of, like you mentioned, that the schedule is going to be a little bit more compact, and he's a good goaltender. I mean, he'd be starting for a lot of teams in this league. And I think that the Canadiens, Mark Bergevin, struck early getting Jake Allen, and I think that there probably would have been a lot of other teams interested in that. You look at Edmonton as an example. They're going into the season with the same goaltending tandem that got them eliminated against the Blackhawks. So it's one of those things where, it's not sustainable going forward, but as a 1-year thing, they had the cap space, and obviously now they used it up a little bit more than they had in the past. I have absolutely no problem with the move. And, if this was like a 3-year deal, I'd have a little bit more problem with it, but there's no problem with 1 year at the cap hit of $15 million for 2 goalies.
Yeah. It's a good move. And another move, which was kind of interesting, I do like the cap hit too, is Tyler Toffoli, who can still score for 4 years of the contract. How does he fit into this roster?
Yeah, that's going to be really interesting to see, because they added Josh Anderson as well to play on the right wing, and the right wing for the Canadiens had gone from a weakness to a strength now. They went into free agency or the draft period, because the Anderson trade happened just before that, with basically Brendan Gallagher, Yoel Armia, and not much else on the right side of that lineup. And now they have Gallagher, they have Anderson, they have Tyler Toffoli, and the Canadiens that are really setting up to be a top 9 team, because you have Philip Deneau, you have Nick Suzuki, you have Jesperi Kotkaniemi, and those 3 guys are going to have even strength time. They're going to get some chances to score. There's the third line is shaping up to be maybe Arturi Lehkonen, Kotkaniemi, and Tyler Toffoli, or Josh Anderson, depending on how you want to sort those guys out, and we'll have to see how they fit in. But Toffoli is what was a surprising move, because it didn't look like the team would be able to afford him, because he's a guy who would normally get close to $6 million a year. But with the current situation, Mark Bergevin saw an opportunity. It's a buyer's market, and he said himself today that he was interested because of the depth at center, and he knew that he was going to play with one of those 3 guys, Deneau, Suzuki, Kotkaniemi, and not many third lines are going to have a center or an opportunity for you to play that. So he's going to fit into their top 9. He'll probably get some power play time as well, and he's going to be a great addition to this team that struggles to score. And to have a guy like Toffoli in your top 9 with Anderson, who scored 20 goals as well, and Gallagher, who scored 30 goals, these are guys that you need to have, and the mix them together is going to be a huge boon for this team.
Before we leave, there are the rumors, of course, with locking up Gallagher long term. What's the update there?
Yeah, Pierre LeBrun said that Gallagher's agent, Jerry Johansson, said that the talks have broken off, the extension talks. Obviously, he was eligible to sign a contract as soon as this season started, because it expires after the end of next season. And really, I don't think that it's a really big deal. I mean, a guy like Gallagher, he's 28 years old. He's coming off a contract, an extremely team-friendly contract at $3.75 million. He's been making that for the last 6 years. This is his real last big payday. And I think that what's going to happen is that you don't necessarily want to sign a guy like Gallagher for 8 years or 7 years because you don't know how that kind of skill set's going to age necessarily. So I think what's going to happen is that between the Gallagher camp and Marc Bergevin is that they're going to have to sacrifice one or the other. Either they're going to have a lower cap hit for more years or a higher cap hit for fewer years. It's really going to depend on that negotiation. At this point, we have no clue how the season's going to go. We have no clue what the finances are going to be like. We have no clue about anything. It's a very uncertain time. So neither side is really ready to necessarily compromise at this point. There's still a whole season to go, a whole off season to go into even what becomes a free agent, whatever the season ends. There's going to be time to negotiate again. And, would it be nice to have it all locked up now? Yes, but I think it's at the point right now where just neither side wants to compromise, and there's no reason for them to do so. And as long as the team wins, I think that both sides will be motivated to get a deal done.
Again, you can find him on Twitter at Jared Book. Jared, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a rush of adrenaline of this big week and a half, everyone. Tampa wins the Cup. We had that long entry level draft. And of course, 2 days later, NHL free agency hits. Wow. All right. Next week, we'll round up with more free agency talk. We're going to talk to a reporter from Toronto and Buffalo about the Leafs and the Sabres. Yes, Taylor Hall talk, TJ Brody and Wayne Simmons chat. As well, we'll have some great guests from the Chell world with the new EA Sports NHL 21 out this week. I do want to thank all our guests today, Laura, Reid, Colin, Jared, and Justin, for coming out to chat all free agency. It's always good to hear analysis from within for that perspective. Remember, if you enjoyed everything on this episode, or you didn't, come tweet me. You can follow me on Twitter at Russia98 or the entire team at Jablam Sports. If you want to contact us or if you have any other questions for the show, you can go there. You can also use the hashtag at Jablam Sports. That's JABLAM Sports. Or you can check out our contact page on our website. That's jablamsports.com/contact. Check out our website again, jablamsports.com. You can see all our podcasts and every episode and game notes for each one, including our guests' info for everything we mentioned on this show. Please subscribe, rate, and review us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and click on the 3 dots in your podcasting app and share this episode with 3 friends. Thank you, everyone. Shout out this week is to my buddy Brett Pietrangelo. He's a good friend of mine and a good work colleague. Thank you for being a good friend and always listening. He's a good Leafs fan, so he gets more riled up than I do at times. I hope you enjoy next week's episode, Podcast Brett, and all you Leaf fans out there. And to every one of our listeners, I'm giving you a virtual hug. Stay healthy, listen, be yourself, and stay strong.